Good morning. This is the exciting class you've been waiting for, my last one on Sunday mornings. Next week, you're going to have Rob Perkins in here, and he's going to be teaching 1 Corinthians on Sunday morning. We'll be mentioning that quite a bit throughout the day and the week. We've gone through the New Testament very quickly, and as I put together some of these questions for our review, I thought, boy, this just pales in comparison with all the questions we could have asked. There's 100 more we could have asked. But as it is, we've got 6 times 5, 30 questions. So not too many. And I'm still trying to get a loan from the bank so I can pay y'all all the money I'll owe you after $100, $200, $300. We'll just see how it goes. But this is intended to be an opportunity for us to review, to show how much we've learned or been reminded of, and no big deal. Here are 6 topics. Remember, we started with a lesson on between the testaments, that intertestamental period between Malachi and Matthew. Got a few questions that relate to that. The Gospels. What do you think's next? The book of Acts. We're going to talk about Paul, not just his letters, but his journeys, just a little bit. We could have 30 questions just on that, couldn't we? Very easily. The general letters, and then finally the book of Revelation. We will have a few questions about that. I think will help remind us of a lot of the details we need to know. As you recall, we really only got through the first 6 chapters. Didn't get very far anyway. As we get this going, I'm going to ask you to call out a category and a dollar amount. And I would prefer you start with the lower dollar amounts, but I understand this group doesn't play by the rules at all. Clark, why don't you start us off? Revelation for 100. Let's see what we got. What does the word revelation mean? Maybe that shouldn't have been a $100 question. Okay, it does mean apocalypse. That's exactly what it means. Somebody else? All right, it's to take something that was hidden and to reveal it. That's what revelation means. Excellent, folks. Revelation, apocalypse, we've given it a new meaning to mean the end of the world, but that's not what the word actually meant. All right, what's next? Between the Testaments, 100. Who was the ruler who tried to have Jesus killed as an infant? Herod the Great. You know, in the New Testament, there are a lot of Herods, and they're not always identified. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do here in our class today. Herod the Great, he's the one who got everything started. That whole dynasty of Herods started. Okay, excellent. Paul 100. All right, how are Paul's letters arranged in our Bibles? I don't mean Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. Why are they arranged the way that they are? We talked about this. All right, length, from largest to smallest, and they are in 2 categories, from largest to smallest. What comes first? There are two groups. There are the letters to the churches, Romans through 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, and then letters to individuals. I think that's important to know, why they're in the order that they are. In other words, they're not in chronological order. And we'll talk about that as we go through our little deal here. All right. Karen, pick one. Paul for 200? Is that what you... No, she said 500. Okay. Name the 4 groups of Paul's letters. See why I made this 500? I'll ask you to do this then. We'll go in chronological order. Galatians, if Galatians is the first letter, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. What do we call those? The early letters. Somebody say? What? The early letters. The early letters. Very good. That makes sense, doesn't it? They're the early letters because they're the earliest. Most certainly, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians would be his first, if not for Galatians. All right, the next group is 1st and 2nd Corinthians and Romans. What do we call those 3 letters? And maybe Galatians, if it goes chronologically, with Romans. No, they're big, they're long, and so we call him his great letters. Those are his great letters. Now, does that mean that Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians are more important than these other letters? Of course not. Just like with the major prophets and the minor prophets. It's not that Isaiah is more important than Obadiah. Well, then again, maybe he is. No, they're not more important. They're just as inspired. So we got 2 groups down. The early, the great letters as they're called. Then Colossians and, well, I guess Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians. The prison letters. Why do we call those letters the prison letters? Because he was in prison when he wrote them. And that's why Philippians is such a depressing letter. I'm so sad. I'm so dejected. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Philippians 4, verse 4. They're not characteristic of a man who is down in the dumps, but who has his hope in Jesus. And then the final group is 1 Timothy, Titus, 2 Timothy, chronologically. And what do we call those? Scholars call them the pastoral letters, the pastorals. We'll call them letters written to preachers, because Timothy, as a young man, don't think he was married, he was just a preacher, and Titus as well. When you know the groupings, that helps you to know where Paul was when he wrote these letters. So when he wrote Ephesians, where was he? In prison in Rome. Where was he when he wrote Philippians? Probably in Rome as well, in prison. All right, that was a $500 question that took us 5 minutes to talk about. What's next? Anybody but Karen. The book of Acts 100. Who preached the first gospel sermon and where? Peter in Jerusalem, on the temple grounds, even though we're not told specifically. Why is that important, that it was Peter who preached the first gospel sermon? What had Peter done just a couple months prior? Denied Jesus. Did Jesus forgive Peter? He most certainly did. Jesus practiced what he preached. He forgave Peter and gave him the privilege of being the one to take the lead on the day of Pentecost. That's why I think that's a really important fact for us to internalize. Will Jesus forgive us? Will he still use us to his glory? We need to remember that. Good lesson. All right? Birthday girl. Anna, you want to pick a... You don't have to answer it. You just ask for 200. Who wrote the book of Acts? And I want you to tell me how you know who wrote the book of Acts. Luke. Is that your guess? It's not a guess. It's the right answer. How do you know? How they both open. So let's take a look at Luke 1. I don't have them on the screen. Luke chapter 1, if you remember, I said that the first 4 verses are one long, elegant sentence. And he says, we're talking about what Jesus began to do and teach. Verse 3, I'm writing to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus. So he wrote it he dedicated it to someone named Theophilus. That's Luke 1, verse 3. If you go over to the opening verses of Acts chapter 1, verse 1, he says, in the first book, O Theophilus, I've dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach. What's the first book he's talking about in Acts 1, verse 1? The Gospel of Luke. Why is that important to know? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the four Gospels. Only Luke has a volume 2. Are there connections between Luke and Acts? We could say, well, there's some similarities, there's some continuation of the story from Matthew and Mark, but there are parallels between Luke and Acts. These books are designed to go together. For example, Luke, lots of details he could have brought out, but Luke brings out a lot of the situations Paul found himself in that parallel with Jesus' life. When Jesus stood before the Sanhedrin Council, who does that remind us of? When Paul is struck because somebody said, you shouldn't answer the high priest that way. Who does that remind us of? Jesus and his trial. Lots of parallels between Jesus and Paul. There are also parallels between Jesus and Peter in the book of Acts. A lot of connections for future study. All right, very good. Paul for 200. I'm going to make you answer it. Besides Galatians, what was Paul's earliest letter? It's kind of a trick question because I put 1st and 2nd Thessalonians together. They were written back to back, not the next day, but a few months apart. So Galatians may be the earliest, but then you got 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Too bad Paul didn't just tell us, I'm writing this in AD 49. Didn't do that. Okay. Say that louder. We've neglected the poor Gospels. Gospels 100. All right. Name John's mother and name Jesus' mother. Mary is whose? Jesus. Elizabeth. Why do we want to link those two together? Why do we want to talk about John and Jesus' moms? They were both miraculous. Tell me about Elizabeth and John. How old was Elizabeth? Old. She was, beyond the age of bearing children. And when Zechariah, her husband, a priest, not a high priest, he was a priest serving in the temple. He was in the holy place offering incense. People were outside praying, and he's inside. Who appears to him? An angel, Gabriel. Gabriel, the name Gabriel means mighty, strong, the mighty one of the Lord. I don't think Gabriel was just some teeny tiny little angel with flapping wings. I think he was big fella. And he's standing next to Zacharias and scares him to death. And what does the angel say? Do you remember? Your prayer has been answered. How long do you think it had been since Zechariah and Elizabeth had stopped praying to God for a child? I mean, they're past the age of childbearing. I don't know. It's just speculation on my part. But does God hear our prayers? Absolutely. Does he always answer them in the way we think he will? You might say he never answers them the way we think. But he had a plan. He heard Zechariah and Elizabeth's prayer, and he answered it in his time. Tell me about Jesus' mother. Was she old? She was young. All right. And what was so amazing? What's a big deal about a young woman having a baby? All right. She was a virgin. This is a basic tenet of our faith, that Mary was a virgin. She was betrothed to Joseph. She was as good as married in that culture. Families picked their spouses, their children's spouses. They were going to be married to each other. And we see the character of Joseph. We don't know a lot about him, but he was a good man, a very righteous man. When he found out that Mary was pregnant, did he want to make a big public display out of it? No, he wanted to divorce her privately. I mean, he knew the child wasn't his. The problem is, Mary hadn't done anything wrong. And who had to tell Joseph, hey, it's all right. It was God, Gabriel, an angel. Okay, what's next? You got to speak up. I'm getting old. Gospels for 200. I apologize. List 3 parables of Jesus. This should be easy. List your favorite parables. The parable of the talents. Okay. All right. I heard somebody say that the 10 lepers, that's not really a parable. That was a miracle. So say that for the miracles. We'll talk about that in a second. What did you say? The parable of the prodigal son. And you remember that there were 2 other parables told before that in Luke 15. The parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost sheep, those all 3 go together. The parable of the lost son. What's another parable? The good Samaritan, the sower. The list goes on and on. Why did Jesus use parables? Why didn't he just tell people the spiritual truth he was trying to get at? Hey, you need to be a neighbor to people. You need to be kind to them, to everyone. Parables are examples, they're illustrations, and they're memorable. They really drive home a point, poignantly. Like the son who leaves home, and there's a dad who's just dying for his son to come back. But can he go and get his son and drag him home? Well, yeah, but what good is that going to do? When we wander away from God and we come back to him, we have to do it on our own, don't we? He can't make us. These stories, these parables are poignant, or they're funny. They always make us go, huh. They make us think critically. We're going to hear about a little bit of that this morning from Shane's sermon during the worship service. You know, today's the 5th Sunday, so y'all get a break from me, and Shane's going to be preaching for us. All right? Yes? Well, you tell me that. Did people catch on to what Jesus was saying in his parables? Yes and no. To those who are outside, to those who would hear the story and they would go, that's nice, and wouldn't pursue trying to understand it. Did they get the parables? No. But what about the disciples? When they were with Jesus privately and they would go, we need some help here. And Jesus rebuked them with the parable of the sower. He said, if you can't understand this parable, you can't understand all the parables. And the sower is kind of a basic parable, and yet there's levels of complexity with it. Jesus was a master storyteller. Just fantastic. And we need to appreciate that. Think about this. I mean, hospitals have been built in the name of the Good Samaritan. A little story, a little parable. And when we look at them in context, they shed so much more light, so many facets that should inspire us spiritually. And they're always poignant. They're always going to make us think. All right. How about, I'll pick Gospels for 300. Let's pair this with the 3 miracles. Name for me 3 miracles. There's a gazillion of them. Water to wine. In John's Gospel, that was the first sign that Jesus performed in John 2. Raising Lazarus from the dead, John chapter 11. That's pretty major, isn't it? How many days had John been dead? 4 days. 4 days. That's pretty amazing. It's not like he resuscitated him. Like the little girl. She had died, Jairus' daughter, but she had just died. Well, with Lazarus, he was already in the tomb. And that was, of course, anticipating Jesus' resurrection, who was dead for 3 days. Another miracle. The 10 lepers, you mentioned them. Tell me about that parable. We didn't talk about it in our survey, but you had 10 lepers, and this is a real event. This isn't a parable. 10 people who come to Jesus. You know, lepers would travel in groups because they couldn't just hang out with everybody. Kind of like these days. COVID, stay away. Well, this is a lot more serious even than that. Leprosy, was it contagious? Yes. and people's lives were destroyed by it. They're healed by Jesus as they're leaving, as they're going back, because they're supposed to report to the priest that they're clean. One of them, one of the 10, sees that he's been cleansed, and what does he do? He goes back. There's a twist, though. What was his ethnicity? He was a Samaritan. And when Jesus sees this fella come back, and he says, "Hey, great, thanks for coming back and being so gracious and thanking me," but he asks, "Where are the 9? Where are the 9?" Here's what I want to get at with the parable, with the parables as well, but with the miracles. Did Jesus perform miracles for the sake of just helping people? They always did what? They showed the power of God, and they taught powerful lessons. Jesus was a master teacher, and he was always teaching and making things memorable. The miracles that he performed did more than just simply say, you're better off now, I'm so happy for you. The water turned to wine. We don't talk about this a whole lot, but I've taught on it here and preached on it a little bit. But water to wine is showing us that Jesus has brought the gospel that is so far superior to the Mosaic law. How do we get that out of turning water to wine? What were the stone pots for the purpose of? Do you remember the stone pots that they poured water into that Jesus then turned into wine? For purification under the old covenant. Jesus took those stale stone jar contents of water and turned it into fresh, beautiful, wonderful, free-flowing wine, anticipating, or I guess in a way, fulfillment of prophecies from Joel and Amos that talk about sweet wine dripping from the mountains in the days of the Messiah. There's a lot of symbolism in Jesus' miracles, not just helping people. Okay, I'm hoping that's all review, and we're already familiar with that. What's next? Finally, the poor general letters being neglected. They're always neglected. That's a thing we shouldn't do. Why are they called general? Exactly. They're not to one single group. When Paul wrote Romans, was that to a specific area? Rome. Or Corinth, to a specific church, apparently, there in Corinth. It breaks down when you look at 2 John and 3 John, because 2 John does seem to have been written to a specific church, to the lady and her children. And then 3 John is addressed to Gaius. So that's not entirely true. But for the most part, the general letters are written to large groups like the diaspora, scattered throughout the Roman Empire in Asia. And that's all. That's the reason. There's another term, an older term that was used to describe these letters. Hebrews, James, 1 2 Peter, 1 2 3 John, Jude. It starts with a C. Instead of calling them the general letters, they are called in literature that you'll read, and Matthew Henry, for example, the Catholic letters. Yeah, I guess we don't use that term anymore. The Catholic letters, universal. That's what Catholic means. The universal letters. The general letters. Hope that drives home that point. All right. Revelation 200. What's the main point of Revelation? I like that answer. God will be victorious. That is the fundamental message of Revelation. What did you say? Victory. That's a good answer. The term that is used a lot in the letters, in particular in Revelation 2 and 3, everyone ends with them saying, to the one who overcomes, I will. Well, that's from the word for victory. It's actually Nike. There was a goddess named Nike. That's where Nike takes their name. And she gave victory to the warriors. Victorious. Those are both excellent answers. Victory. Our victory in Jesus Christ. All right? Between the Testaments, 200. Okay, do you remember your history? Who was emperor when Jesus was born? He was actually the official first Roman emperor. Starts with an A, Augustus. Augustus. You remember, we all know about Julius Caesar. Well, his, I guess, nephew, whom he adopted as his son, Augustus. And what I want to say about Augustus, we didn't really talk about him. He was a brilliant ruler. He was friends with Herod the Great, not as close to him as Marcus Aurelius was. Who was the guy? Mark Antony. That's who it was. Not Marcus Aurelius. That was a different emperor. Mark Antony. But Herod knew these people. He actually knew these folks. Augustus one time said that Herod, it would be better to be Herod's pig than his son. And the reason he said that is because those words for son and pig sound similar in the Greek language. Pig and son. Herod, being part Jew, if he had pigs, would those pigs be killed and slaughtered and eaten? Probably not. What if you're one of Herod's sons? Did he kill some of his children? Yes. So that's a joke that Augustus made about Herod. That tells you how cruel Herod the Great was. And he had a reputation. But he ruled with an iron fist over Judea and Galilee and all that region. And that's why Rome placed him in that position. He was subservient to Rome. But Herod was actually called a king. Okay, enough on that. General letters, 200. Which general letters only have one chapter? Quick. What are they? Well, that's not a general letter. So, that's wrong. Jude, 2nd John, and 3rd John. Okay, that's more of a trivia question. I guess I should have made it 100 because it's not that significant. But it is. It lets us know that these are short letters. When is the last time you just said, I want to read the book of 3rd John? I want to read that letter. Let me curl up with my Bible here, and I'm just going to read it. These letters are neglected. Are they any less important? Are they any less inspired? We need to read them. We need to study them. Jude is hard hitting. It is a great letter for us to read. Okay? Gospels, 400. During his crucifixion, it was an important detail. None of Jesus' bones were broken. That's great. But why is that important? Number one, to fulfill prophecy. Because I think Psalm 69 is what refers to no bones being broken. But at the beginning of the Gospel of John, it's John who makes this point. At the beginning of the Gospel of John, you have John the Baptist. He sees Jesus coming and he says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And then at the end of the Gospel, you have Jesus dying in John 19, excuse me. And when it came time to break the legs of the crucified victims, Jesus was already dead. They did not break his bones. And then John says, this is to fulfill what is written. Not a bone of him shall be broken. But what is the connection between Jesus as the Lamb of God and none of his bones being broken during crucifixion? Okay, the Passover lamb that the Jews had been offering for 1.5 millennia, whenever that animal was to be sacrificed, had to be a 1-year-old lamb, perfect, without blemish. No bones were to be broken during the process of preparing it. That takes on spiritual significance for us. Jesus was without blemish. He was our perfect sacrifice. He is the Lamb of God. What's interesting is, aren't we also lambs of God? He's the Lamb, but we also are lambs of God that are supposed to be without blemish. All right, getting into the harder ones here. maybe. Gospels, 500. How about that? We'll finish up a section. During Jesus' temptation, his showdown with the devil, he quoted from the Old Testament. This is 500, remember? This is supposed to be hard. What books did he quote from? Deuteronomy and Deuteronomy and Deuteronomy. So I know that's a little bit of a trick question. What I should have said, I guess, what Old Testament book? I don't like to ask trick questions. Why is that significant? All right, reminding the people of the laws of God. During the wilderness wanderings for 40 years, was Israel tempted? Yeah. And they never gave in to temptation. When they didn't have bread, they said, God, we're going to wait patiently on you because we know you are all powerful and you'll take care of us. When the devil tempted Jesus for 40 days, and he said, turn these stones into bread. I know you're super hungry. What did Jesus say? Quoting from Deuteronomy, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. What he's saying is, I'm going to trust my Father over you. And you also remember Satan would preface each of those with, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God. What was the event that happened just prior to Jesus' temptation in the wilderness? His baptism. And what was declared by God from heaven? This is my beloved Son. The next scene, the temptation, you got the devil saying, oh, you're God's son, huh? If you are, then why isn't God taking care of you? Why isn't your Father taking care of you? If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. And Jesus doesn't say, well, I'll show you. He says, no, we're not playing this game. Temptation. Good. All right, we're done with the Gospels. What's next? Paul 300. Which of Paul's letters is your favorite and why? This is a thought question on your part. You're supposed to answer. Jenny, would you help me out? What's your favorite Pauline letter? They're all your favorite, right? Did I hear an answer? Corinthians. Well, which one? Oh. Why? Why do you like 1st and 2nd Corinthians? Okay. They give us examples of what we're supposed to do in a church. It shows us that churches can work through problems. Okay.
1st and 2nd Timothy is a young man, all guides and directs, and comes from a home that gave.
All right, Timothy. He came from a home where he was given divine instruction, and Timothy is greatly encouraged by those letters. Okay. It's hard to pick a favorite. I know. That's why it's 300, because it's sort of hard. Anybody else? What's a Pauline letter that you just really love to read and study? Philippians. For the encouragement. Okay. Very good. Very good. When we were out here in Classroom 8, we were studying Philippians. We were in groups and we were talking, and I heard somebody say that they had never studied Philippians. I won't tell you who by any means. One of us said, I've never studied Philippians. That is sad. I'm glad we were able to remedy that. It's magnificent, isn't it? All right, we better keep going. I better stop talking. Paul for 400. Name 3 of Paul's traveling companions. Luke. That's exactly right. Luke, the author of the Gospel of Luke and Acts. Marc. Timothy. Give me some. Well, okay. Let's just leave it at that. Silvanus, Silas, Barnabas. There's a ton of them. Epaphras, a bunch of them, yes. Paul had lots of people surrounding him all the time, and that's something we need to appreciate. We're not going to finish. I've been talking too much. Between 300. Name the Roman prefect who ruled Judea during Jesus' lifetime. We often refer to him as the governor, but that's technically he was a prefect, not a governor. Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate. Okay. 400. When Jesus was reading the prophet Isaiah, he just opened it up and started reading. What building was he in? A synagogue. Can you tell me what city? Can you remember that? It was his hometown, which means it was Nazareth. Synagogues. Where do you read about synagogues in the Old Testament? You don't, and that's why this question is pertaining to between the Testaments. Jesus often would go, throughout his life, he went to the synagogue on Sabbath and worshiped. That was part of what they did. That's what he was doing. He was participating in worship. He had already started his ministry. People were excited to have Jesus there. But when he read that prophecy from Isaiah, what did he say to the crowd that made him so mad? He reads Isaiah 62. This is being fulfilled in your hearing. And it was about the Messiah. Jesus was telling them, I am the Messiah. And that infuriated them. Between the Testaments, 500. Who killed John the Baptist? It was a Herod. Herod Antipas. Excellent. There's also Herod Agrippa the first. Who did Herod Agrippa the first kill? Well, that was Herod the Great. Maybe Herod Agrippa the first did. Herod Agrippa the first is the one who killed James, the brother of Jesus, in Acts 12. Who did Herod Agrippa the second kill? Nobody. He's the one who was at Paul's trial. So anyway, Herod Antipas, more often than not in the Gospels, when you're reading about an unnamed Herod, it's going to be Herod Antipas. His older brother Archelaus is mentioned briefly in Matthew, but not much is said about him. Okay. Acts 400. What about that poor little 300? Explain why Acts 1 verse 8 is the key verse in Acts. What do we say about Acts 1 verse 8? Let's read it. Jesus is speaking to his disciples before his ascension. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. What does that verse do for us? It talks about the spread of the gospel. You will be my witnesses. Is that an important word in Acts? You will be my people who bear testimony about me in Jerusalem, Acts 2 through 7, in Judea and Samaria, Acts 8 through 12, and to the uttermost parts of the earth, Acts 13 through 28. Do you remember how Acts 1 verse 8 outlines the book of Acts? If you didn't, you remember now. Acts 300. Name 3 people or groups of people who were baptized in Acts. There's a ton of them, aren't there? Paul. Paul was baptized in the book of Acts. The Philippian jailer. His name was Bob, in case you don't know. Yeah, Acts 16, the Philippian jailer. The Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. I'm going to talk about him in just a couple of weeks from the pulpit. All right. There's a ton of them. I want to ask you this. Did you say something? Lydia and her household there in Philippi as well. Are there some examples of non-conversions in the book of Acts where the gospel is presented to people and they rejected it? Yes. Can you name me some of those? This is Acts for 600. Felix. I thought you said Demas. Felix, the governor of Caesarea. He said, oh, no, I'm not. You come back. You just keep coming back. But he never responded. Agrippa II. Another one. I guess it was, Felix. Agrippa II. There's some non-responders in the book of Acts. That's also important. Not everybody accepted the gospel. We talk about in Acts 2, there were 3,000 who obeyed the gospel on the day of Pentecost. But there were thousands more people who would have been there. They didn't accept the gospel either. That's something to think about. That's not explicit. Okay, let's do Acts 500. What letters did Paul write on the third journey? I tried to pick some questions that would help us review. Tell me this. What letters did Paul write on his first journey? None. On his second journey, he wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. On the third journey, he went to, he wrote 1st and 2nd Corinthians and Romans in that order. And because we're running out of time, that's all I'll say on that. Is it important to know where Paul was when he wrote his letters? You better say yes, because that's something really important, I think. We got 6 left, so let's go through these quickly. Let's just go 3, 4, 5 in each category. 2 of the general letters do not identify its author. What are they, and why do you think they don't identify their author? Hebrews and these are general letters. Philemon's not one of the general letters. That which was from the beginning, which we have seen with our eyes and heard with our ears and touched with our hands. 1 John. Why do Hebrews and 1 John not name their authors? Because they're not really letters. What are they? They're sermons. That was an important concept, I thought. What is Hebrews about? Faith, that's a good answer, Hebrews 11. Christ being the sacrifice, Christ and the new covenant being superior. What did you say? Preeminent over everything and everyone. It's about Jesus. And Hebrews 11, you mentioned faith. Every one of those people that exemplified faith, who are they pointing to? The author and finisher of our faith. The beginning and the end of our faith is Jesus, as Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2 begin. Jesus is the focus of that letter and his superiority. 500 for James. What book does James make numerous references to? What section of Scripture does James refer to? I didn't mean for this to be hard, but this is important if you're studying James. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, is referred to frequently in the book of James. We're running out of time, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Revelation 300. How is Jesus most often referred to in Revelation? The Lamb. The Lamb. And how do people feel about this lamb? Are they like, oh, that's so cute. Let me pet this little lamb. Where's Mary? Where's Mary? This is a ferocious lamb. And people are terrified of the lamb. 400? Can somebody name the 7 seals? What are the first 4? We'll just do that. The 4 horsemen. What is number 5? So this is really important. It's Revelation 6, verses 9 through 11. It's the souls under the altar. And what are they crying out? Vengeance. Vengeance. Seal 6 is when you've got the kings and important people of the earth, and they're scared to death of the Lamb, and they say, who can blank before the one who sits on the throne and the Lamb? Who can stand? And as that seal continues in Revelation 6, going into chapter 7, there are 2 groups presented to us. There's the 144,000 and the great multitude. And what are the great multitude doing when John sees the great multitude? What are they doing? They are standing before the Lamb. And that's as far as we got in our study of Revelation, our survey of it. All right, Revelation for 500. Can you do this? Can you name the 3 times that we looked at where John heard one thing and saw another. I just gave you one. In Revelation 1, he heard a voice behind him and he turns to look. And does he see a person? No, he sees, well, he does. He sees Jesus, but he also sees 7 golden lampstands. That's what's emphasized. What's another one? He hears one thing and sees another. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Oh, wow, that's going to be great. And what does he see? The Lamb. Does he ever see a lion? No. But John links those two together. And then the third time, he is told a number, 144,000. And he turns and sees the great multitude. That is a technique that appears numerous times in Revelation, and I think it helps us immeasurably in our interpretation of that book. All right. Well, thank you. We're out of time, but I really appreciate you all participating in our little survey here. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to Rob and your husband, Larry, being in here next quarter. Thank you so much.